What if I told you that every dollar in your wallet is owned by a private corporation that has never been audited? Not federal, not government, not yours. A bank owned by other banks with the power to create money from nothing, to crash economies on purpose and to answer to absolutely no one. Not the president, not Congress, not you. This is the story they made sure you'd never learn in school. The name itself is a lie. Federal Reserve. It sounds official, governmental, like the Federal Bureau of Investigation or the Federal Aviation Administration. But here's what they don't tell you. The Federal Reserve is as federal as Federal Express. It's a private institution owned by private banks, operating for private profit, with more power over your life than any elected official will ever have. And it was designed that way, deliberately, secretly, on a cold November night in 1910. Let me take you back. 1910. America was in chaos. The economy lurched from boom to bust with terrifying regularity. Bank runs, panics, recessions that destroyed fortunes overnight. The panic of 1907 had been particularly brutal. J.P. Morgan himself had to bail out the entire banking system using his own money. It was dramatic, heroic even. But it proved something dangerous, that private bankers, not the government, controlled America's financial destiny. So the most powerful men in America decided to do something about it. Not to fix the problem, but to formalize their control. To make it legal. To make it permanent. November 22nd, 1910. 7 men boarded a private train car in New Jersey. Destination: Jekyll Island, Georgia. A private resort owned by the richest families in America. The Morgan family, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts. This wasn't a vacation. This was a conspiracy. And these 7 men represented 1/4 of the entire world's wealth. Their names matter. Nelson Aldrich, the most powerful senator in America and father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller Jr., Frank Vanderlip. President of National City Bank, the largest bank in the country. Henry Davison ... senior partner at J.P. Morgan and Company. Charles Norton. President of First National Bank of New York, Benjamin Strong. Another Morgan lieutenant, Paul Warburg. Partner at Kuhn, Loeb and Company, and representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty, and 1 government official. Abraham Pyatt Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. They traveled in secret. Used only first names. Pretended to be on a duck hunting trip. For 9 days, they locked themselves away and designed the Federal Reserve System. A private central bank that would control America's money supply, that would have the power to create currency from nothing. That would be owned by member banks, run by member banks, and operated for the benefit of member banks. But they called it federal to make Americans think it was part of the government. The deception was brilliant. They wrote the Federal Reserve Act to sound complicated, technical, boring, dense legislative language that no ordinary person would ever read. Then they waited for the perfect moment to pass it. December 23rd, 1913. Most of Congress had already left for Christmas break. President Woodrow Wilson signed it into law, and later admitted it was the greatest mistake of his presidency. He wrote, and these are his exact words, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by its system of credit. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. But it was too late. The Federal Reserve was born. And America would never be the same. Here's how the trick works. The Federal Reserve has the power to print money, not physical printing. That's just the Treasury Department following orders. The real power is creating money from absolutely nothing through something called fractional reserve banking. When the government needs money, the Treasury issues bonds. The Federal Reserve buys those bonds, not with money they have, but with money they simply create by typing numbers into a computer. Then they loan that money to the government at interest. Money created from nothing, loaned at interest, that you and I have to pay back through taxes. Think about that for a moment. The government could print its own money. Interest-free. debt-free. But instead, they borrow from a private bank that creates money from nothing, and we pay interest on it forever. The national debt isn't a mistake, it's the business model. When the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the national debt was $3 billion. Today, it's $34 trillion. $34 trillion. That's $102,000 of debt for every single American. Your share of a debt created by a private bank loaning money it never had to a government that could have printed its own. But the debt is just the beginning. The real power is control. The Federal Reserve controls interest rates. When they raise rates, borrowing becomes expensive, businesses slow down, people lose jobs, homes go into foreclosure. When they lower rates, cheap money floods the economy. Asset bubbles form, inflation rises. The rich get richer buying assets with cheap borrowed money while your wages stay the same and everything costs more. They decide. Not elected officials, not the market. 12 people sitting in a room in Washington making decisions that affect 330 million Americans, and you have no say, no vote, no recourse. If this is making your hands shake, if you're restarting to realize that everything you thought you knew about money was a carefully constructed lie, then you need to see what comes next. Subscribe right now. Because the rabbit hole gets darker, and the people who control this system don't want you to know what we're about to reveal. 1929. The Federal Reserve decided to tighten the money supply. They raised interest rates, restricted credit, and the stock market, which had been inflated by easy Fed money for years, collapsed. The Great Depression wasn't a natural disaster. It was a controlled demolition. Banks failed by the thousands. People lost everything. Unemployment hit 25%, and while America suffered, the members of the Federal Reserve System, the banks that owned it, bought up assets for pennies on the dollar. 2008. The same playbook. The Fed kept interest rates at 1% for years. Banks loaned money to anyone with a pulse. A housing bubble inflated to impossible proportions. Then the Fed raised rates, the bubble burst. Millions lost their homes. Retirement accounts evaporated. Unemployment soared. And the Federal Reserve's response? They bailed out the banks, not with government money, but with money they created from nothing. $16 trillion in emergency loans. $16 trillion to the same institutions that caused the crisis. The same institutions that own the Federal Reserve. You lost your home. They got a bailout. You lost your job. They got bonuses. You paid taxes. They paid nothing. And the Federal Reserve, the institution that created the conditions for the crisis, got more power, more control, more authority to manipulate the economy for the benefit of its owners. Do you see the pattern? Every crisis makes them stronger. Every collapse consolidates wealth at the top. Every intervention makes you more dependent on a system designed to extract everything you have. This isn't capitalism. It's not free markets. It's a rigged game, and the Federal Reserve holds all the cards. But here's what really should keep you awake at night. The Federal Reserve has never been fully audited. Not once in its 111-year history. Congress can't audit it. The president can't audit it. The American people, whose currency it controls, have no right to know what it does with the power we never agreed to give it. It operates in complete secrecy, makes decisions behind closed doors, and when questioned, they hide behind complexity and jargon that's designed to make you give up trying to understand. Why? What are they hiding? If the Federal Reserve really served the public interest, if it really was protecting the economy, why the secrecy? Why the lies? Why the absolute refusal to allow independent oversight? Because transparency would reveal the truth, that the Federal Reserve exists to benefit its owners, that every policy decision, every interest rate change, every quantitative easing program is designed to transfer wealth from the many to the few, from you to them. Think about your life right now, how hard you work, how much you pay in taxes, how expensive everything has become. Your rent, your groceries, your health care, your education. Everything costs more, but your wages barely move. Why? Because the Federal Reserve keeps printing money, diluting the value of every dollar you earn. While the people connected to the money printer buy assets that appreciate, they own the real estate that you rent. They own the stocks that you can't afford. They own the debt that keeps you enslaved. You're not poor because you don't work hard enough. You're poor because the system was designed to keep you that way. The Federal Reserve is the engine of inequality, the mechanism of control, the invisible hand, not of the free market, but of organized theft. And cryptocurrency? That's not the escape they tell you it is. It's the evolution. Digital currency they can control even more precisely. Track every transaction. Tax every exchange. Turn off your access with a keystroke. The Federal Reserve is already developing FedNow and working on a central bank digital currency. Money that exists only in their computers. Money they can program. Money they can make expire. Money they can prevent you from spending on things they don't approve of. This is the future they're building. A prison made of invisible walls. Economic slavery so complete you won't even recognize the chains. And the Federal Reserve, this private bank that's never been audited, that answers to no one, that has the power to create money from nothing, will control every aspect of your financial life. But here's what they didn't count on. You're awake now. You see the deception. You understand that the name Federal Reserve is a lie, that the system is rigged, that your financial future is controlled by people who don't care if you succeed or fail as long as they profit. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Will you demand that Congress audit the Federal Reserve? Will you support politicians who want to end the Fed? Will you move your money out of the big banks that own it? Will you buy hard assets they can't print? Will you educate others about this greatest con in American history? Or will you go back to sleep, pretending that the people who control your money have your best interests at heart? Every moment you wait, they create more dollars from nothing. Every second you hesitate, your savings lose value. Every day you ignore this truth, the chains get tighter. The Federal Reserve isn't going to reform itself. The banks that own it aren't going to give up control. The system won't fix itself. It's working exactly as designed. The only question left is whether you'll be a slave to it, or whether you'll fight for a system where money serves people, not the other way around. If this revelation just shattered your understanding of how money works, if you're ready to learn exactly which banks own the Federal Reserve and how much profit they've extracted from your labor, then subscribe and activate notifications immediately. Next week, we're exposing the Bretton Woods betrayal. The moment America severed the dollar from gold, destroyed the global economy, and created the perfect storm that's about to break. The final collapse starts with understanding how we got here. The vault is open. The deception is exposed. The Federal Reserve is not federal, has no reserves, and owns your future, unless you take it back. Are you ready to fight for your freedom?